So the part of the immune system that we're going to talk about today is the innate immune system. And I think on our schedule, I had called it first line of defense, or non-specific immunity. So there are two big branches of the immune system, which are innate or non-specific or first, second line of defense. Those are all talking about the same thing, and this arrow is supposed to be coming down from innate. I wrote on the screen again on Wednesday in A&P2, and now I'm probably not going to do that again for a while. It's fresh. So those are other names for the innate immune system, or the innate branch of immunity. Acquired immunity can also be called specific immunity or third line of defense. So those are some names to describe these two branches. And before I go through what innate really is like, I want to do a compare-contrast of these. And I'll keep coming back to this every so often, but this is a list that you should commit to memory. Like, what's innate generally like? What is acquired generally like? So I'm going to draw a line down the middle, and this side goes with innate, this side with acquired. So your innate immune mechanisms, they are always present, and that's why they're called innate. Like you're basically born with these. So they're always present. They don't require specific pathogen exposure. That's why they're called non-specific. So you don't have to have encountered that specific pathogen before for your innate immune system to help protect you. Responses from your innate immune system are fast. You get fast responses, but they're kind of weak. Fast but weak responses. Still helpful, always ready. They're good against any kind of pathogen. It's just going to be weak. And this branch also does not show what we call immune memory. You don't need memory if it's just for your general pathogen attack. You don't have to remember, oh yeah, I saw that pathogen before, that specific one. So pretty much everything that is in this list has the opposite in this list. So you really could just remember one set and the other is the opposite. So I'm going to line them up. Okay, so for specific or acquired, this one has to be developed. You're not born with this part. It has to be developed specifically by exposure to a pathogen. So you will not develop it until you in some way encounter the pathogen. You have to acquire this. You have to develop it. This one is a slower response, but it's a strong response once you develop it. And acquired immunity does have immune or immunological memory. So this one, quick, general, weak, but you've already got it. This one, you have to take the time to develop it and learn a certain pathogen, but once you develop it, it's strong and it lasts a long time. Yeah.
So, is the acquired, so like do you develop multiple, like do you have a lot at the same time?
It's kind of like, if you think of pathogens like Pokemon cards or something. Like you've got that card or you don't. So this is not a body of immunity, it's immunity against specific ones. So, for example, say that I'm, middle-aged and I've lived in the US a long time and I've encountered a lot of pathogens in the past and I've built acquired immunity against them. That's not going to help me if a brand new one comes along. This would always help me no matter what pathogen, but it is like you have to have multiple acquired immunities to pathogens individually. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, and so would that be like if there's different strains with one acquired immunity cover all strains of that?
Like for flu, no.
But like does one cover all of like streptococcus?
It's going to depend on what is the specific piece of the pathogen that you use to see it. So I want to add a word in here, a word antigen. And the second lecture back after the exam, we talk about antibodies and antigens. So what it would be is we recognize pathogens by these little shapes that they carry. Like we don't see E. coli, we see this piece of E. coli. And so if that piece of E. coli is on every E. coli, we can recognize every E. coli. It may or may not be. Or if the piece is a influenza spike and the spike changes, we're not going to recognize every spike. It's just that one that we saw that one time. It's a good question.
So you treat those markers kind of like spikes that they can change among strains? Or they tend to be general to its, I guess?
There are some that are really general.
Okay.
And there are some that do change a lot. So if it doesn't change, and we see it once, we have memory against it. If it does change, we don't remember. And I'll come back to that multiple times because it's a big deal. Division. This table here is also giving you some of this same information, but putting on it what are the individual defenses that fall into these categories. So if we put here, instead of immune system, host defenses, we can divide into two big branches, the innate or non-specific, the acquired, the specific. Did we put, I put third line of defense back there on the other? Anyway. If you're a pathogen, you encounter these branches in a certain order. It's basically like when you're trying to find the portal of entry, you're coming up against the first line of defense. If you make it into inside the body, then you encounter second line of defense, which is still part of innate. And then if you hang around in there long enough, your body will try to make actual immunity, acquired immunity against it. That's third line of defense. So these first two lines, okay, today we're just on the first line. That's why I keep going over to look at the schedule. We're just on the first line today. Second line, we start talking about after this next exam. Third line, we actually have, 3 days on that or something to talk about those. But this helps you categorize in your mind. Later, when you talk about fever, you're like, oh yeah, fever, that's part of the second line, that's part of innate defenses. And that would be something that you have right away. You don't have to learn how to make a fever. That's a useful review chart. So the first line of defenses are just general barriers. General barriers, whether they're physical or chemical. And I've put both of these onto one slide. This is more really than one slide worth of information, so I'm going to start out talking about the physical barriers. So imagine, we talked about the steps it takes to establish an infection. And the first one is portal of entry. So one way to think about this is if something is a portal of entry for a pathogen, what that means is that's a barrier or barriers that a pathogen could actually overcome. So the pathogen has a chance to overcome the barriers at that place, right? So something like Streptococcus pyogenes, that's a respiratory pathogen. And if you breathe it in, if someone coughs it into your face or something like that, it's at the correct portal of entry and it's got a chance. It's got a chance because that's its correct portal. If someone coughed Streptococcus pyogenes onto your foot, it's not really getting through that barrier no matter what. So barriers are barriers. Barriers at a particular portal of entry for that pathogen, that's where it's got a chance. Like it might be able to get through that portal. So this picture is showing actually the chemical barriers. The physical barriers are not they're the ones that are not quite associated with chemicals. So skin, especially unbroken skin, and especially if you have thick unbroken skin, that's a good barrier. That's a good barrier. Where do you have thick skin on your body?
Your feet, palms.
Your palms and your soles of your feet, which is useful because that's what touches most of the world. Touches the world the most through history. I've got like probably poison ivy right here on my.
Like currently?
I think that's what it is. Something. Keep scratching it. This morning I scratched it enough that it's kind of picked off. I know I'm not supposed to scratch it.
Some people don't.
I'm a picker. So, if you have unbroken skin, that's a great barrier. This place that I just picked and it's a little bit bleeding, I have now made that an easier portal of entry for skin microbes. Does that make sense? So, unbroken skin, when I talked about sitting down on the toilet seat, probably nothing's going to happen. Unbroken skin. And the thicker the better. So, skin is a good barrier. Remember what's in there. So, AMP1 people, have you talked about skin already?
Yeah, so just do a test.
You're so excited about it. So you've got layers going on there. You've got keratinized dead cells. That's a lot of thickness for microbes to get through if your skin is healthy and unbroken. Okay, the second major set of barriers are your mucous membranes. Notice the spelling on that. So MUCUS, that is the secretion. MUCOUS is the membrane that makes the secretion. So mucous membranes. And where do you have those? You generally have those at body entries. You have portals, you have mucous membranes at portals of entry. It's no coincidence. And these work best also if they're unbroken, undamaged. So those work by cell continuity. So cell continuity plus a layer of fluid, that gives you some barrier. Third set of barriers, and Asley and Austin, I didn't talk about these in AMP2 because there's just not enough time. Hairs and eyelashes. Nose hairs, ear hair, if you have ear hair, eyelashes, if you have eyelashes. Those are physical barriers to prevent microbes from getting deeper. May not be the best in the world, but they do help. And they do trap, and they do form a barrier. So the physical ones are pretty easy to understand. It's a wall, it's a layer, it's some hairs that are blocking entry deeper to the body. And if I go back to the chart picture here, yeah, surface protection, anatomical and physiological barriers, keep microbes from penetrating, same, just in different language. So the anatomical ones, those are physical barriers. That's a structure, that's a thing, that's a surface. The next part I'm going to talk about are the chemical barriers. And this picture over here, this cross section of the person, it's showing all of the different chemical barriers. So I think what I want to do is write some things about some of these over next to it, but note that they are all chemical barriers. So maybe draw a picture or draw arrows to show that this picture is about chemical barriers, except for skin. Except for skin and mucus. All of these others are chemical barriers. So let's start from outside in. The sweat. Sweat itself is antimicrobial for a few different reasons. So it has salt in it, which can be a selective agent we've seen in lab. Some microbes don't tolerate salt. So if you think about history of people, back in the time, people were not always taking showers and baths like now. You're like, even queens of England back in the day, maybe they took a bath every 2 months or something like that. It does seem crazy like now, but what you would end up with in that situation is, a lot of sweat dried on your skin and a lot of salt dried on your skin, and the salt itself is a barrier. Like in modern society, we think that soap is the best defense. We have natural defenses, and if you don't have soap, you may be smelly, but you're not going to maybe healthier overall. I still like soap. Okay, so salt itself is a defense. And you also have other antimicrobial chemicals in sweat. That's not a thing that people have a lot of funding to study, but they do exist. Second, on the skin, your skin normally, if you're not washing it too much and not washing it with too harsh of soaps, it's going to be acidic. Like if you could take a pH paper and wet it and stick it on your skin, it's going to turn to the acid color. And that's normal. And that's coming from flora on your skin. If you are a person that turns every lipstick hot pink, it's an acid, that's a pH response, acid response.
I have that problem all the time.
This is the most guys I've had in this class in a long time, as a percentage. But that's a thing that happens. And for guys that wear makeup, that does exist. Could happen with them too. If you turn cheap jewelry green, like around the back of your neck or through your post holes, that's an acid reaction. And it probably means that you have less penetrable skin than other people. Sebum itself. So pretend now that I'm writing about sebum and wax. It's writing on his head or her head. Sebum and wax have antimicrobial chemicals as well. Wax is also a physical barrier. You know, they say you're not supposed to Q-tip it out of there. It is a barrier, especially if it builds up a lot, and it's chemically active. So is the sebum from your sebaceous glands. Mucus, remember that, we said that was a physical. Here's mucus again, mucus everywhere. Okay. The next one I want to talk about is lysozyme. So notice they've got lysozyme here, in tears and saliva. Lysozyme is an enzyme that we make that breaks peptidoglycan. An enzyme that we make that breaks peptidoglycan. What's peptidoglycan?
Part of the cell wall for bacteria.
Yeah, remember, thick in a gram negative, thin in a gram positive. This is an enzyme that breaks it. So if peptidoglycan is like a chain link fence and it holds the cell together, keeps it from bursting, this is like bolt cutters or whatever. Until I don't do a lot of cutting of chain link fences, but that would break it enough for the wall to be so weak that it leads to death of the microbe. That's lysozyme. So your tears themselves contain lysozyme. And this time of year during midterms, like, we could probably go cry in the tubes in the lab and kill bacteria that way. Or spit into a tube and count how many bacteria before and after.
I need somebody to cry, I got you.
Oh, this midterm week is so, I feel for you all. What was I going to write about this? Lysozyme. Oh, I know what I was going to write. Lysozyme is more effective against gram negatives, or sorry, gram positives. Because if you're gram positive, there's nothing between your peptidoglycan and the lysozyme. Those gram negatives have an outer membrane and they can somewhat block the effects of lysozyme. Lysozyme is great. What else? Stomach acid. Just make a note there. Stomach acid, when it's made, it has a pH of 2. That is really acid. That's going to digest microbes.
Is that when you get like the ulcer, like stomach ulcer?
Yeah. What a stomach ulcer is when your stomach acid is still normal, but your stomach mucus is messed up, or your stomach lining is messed up because of an infection. And then your own acid burns your own self and it hurts. In AMP2, I have a video about that we usually watch.
So say like if you like throw it up a lot and you have to soak up your stomach acid, does that like corrode your throat?
It can.
Doesn't
Yeah.
it kill something out in your throat?
If you are throwing up acid, it would be affecting anything that is in the esophagus, including microbes, including your own cells as well, because your esophagus does not have as much mucus layer as down here. That's why it would burn. I think it sometimes burns. Vomiting is I need to talk about that in a minute too. Vomiting is a protective mechanism, but not as a way to kill microbes. It's just as a way to get rid of microbes. That would be a flushing mechanism. Last chemical barrier that I want to discuss are enzymes. So when you go to AMP2, if you're not already in it, we have 13 different enzymes, including ones that even start in your saliva. We have 13 different enzymes that break down carbs, lipids, and fats, including carbs, lipids, and fats in microbes. And we'd be attempting to digest parts of them too. So the enzymes are helping you as well in this process. That would be a chemical barrier. Oh, but I do have a slide separate about flushing mechanisms. So, this flushing mechanisms, let's see, where does your book put
You said
this?
what breaks down? You said carbs, lipids.
Enzymes,
Carbs, lipids, and what?
proteins, carbs, lipids, and proteins. Your book does not put flushing mechanisms in a particular spot. I like to put them with physical barriers, actually. Because to me, this is a physical process. It's not a chemical breakdown. So make a note, these flushing mechanisms that we have, I'm going to consider them physical barriers. And all of these have in common that you have fluid or air moving out of a portal of entry. Actually, let's make it say a substance, a fluid, or air moving out of a portal of entry. And that process carries microbes away. You're flushing them away. And pretty much every portal of entry has a flushing mechanism that goes with it. So we'll talk about the airway one first. Imagine, going back, someone coughs Streptococcus pyogenes into your face and you breathe it in. It's got a chance, it's at the correct portal of entry, but it's going to encounter several things along the way. It is going to hit mucus, or let's say it's going to encounter mucus. And in the airway, your mucus is constantly being flapped upward by these ciliated cells in your trachea and your upper airways. Did you talk about this in lab? Did you look at ciliated for AMP2? Yeah, I didn't talk about it in lecture, but it's pretty important. So here's the actual lining of your airway. Here's some E. coli, or, I mean, it could be E. coli. It could be any rod-shaped cell with flagellum. Oh, I'm stuck. Stuck in the mucus. I'm getting flapped out. That's just the flapping that you don't feel. So there's mucus, there are cilia, these little cell extensions sweeping upward. And we would also add cough, sneeze. Sniff is going the other way. So sniff, that we're all doing, sniff is moving mucus out of the nasal passages to here, and then you have a choice whether to spit it out or swallow it. Did I already talk about that here?
No.
Okay, I really didn't? Maybe that was in AMP2. So some people spit it out, some people swallow it. If you swallow it, guess what? Stomach acid. So it might seem like, well, it'd be better to spit it out and get it out of your body. I don't know, either way. But you're supposed to tell little kids, blow your nose.
Now what if it's like yellow and green?
Yellow and green indicate that you have an immune fight going on there. And that would be, it's still, I don't want to like get too much into talking about that choice, but if you don't spit it out, it is going down the esophagus, it is encountering stomach acid. And if it's a respiratory pathogen, that's not even the correct place anyway, so decent choice actually. Coughing, same. Cough, sneeze. So that's for airways, airway pathogens. Let's talk about ingested pathogens. I always wonder after I say that, I feel like people are sniffing more. Anyway, ingested. So if you ingest Ingested pathogens.
Is this still under flushing?
Yeah, still flushing. Vomiting or diarrhea are both sometimes flushing mechanisms. Like diarrhea can be a cause of disease, but it can also help you flush pathogens as well. It's kind of a chicken and an egg thing. Vomiting, a lot of times when you're vomiting, it's because your body thinks that something is dangerous and you need to get it out of your stomach.
I hate vomiting.
I do too.
My
So why do you
friend-
vomit when you get like super tired because you're out of shape?
I think it's probably because you're irritating the nerves, actually.
Makes me vomit.
My friend was just vomiting because she found out she had strep. Isn't it
So strep vomiting, that is a thing too. Strep vomiting is your throat gets so sore back here that it initiates a vomiting reflex.
Why?
Something about nerves back here. You know how people can make themselves throw up if they hit that area.
Yeah.
So like strep is generally in that area, and it's initiating that nerves and making them vomit, and then that's awful. You already feel bad from strep, and then you throw up. Little kids do that.
What's the medulla oblongata?
That the medulla oblongata.
Yeah.
Back here.
Oh,
That's a good brainstem.
That is involved with vomiting. I
it
think.
was on Waterboy. I just had it in my head. I couldn't remember.
You'll get to that in AP1 in a few
I
weeks.
think we're in it now. That's the sad part.
Why do people throw up whenever they get a concussion? Yeah.
When they get a concussion,
Yeah.
that's also like your brain somewhat interfaces with vomiting too. So it would be related to that. That's not a great answer, but
So your body's like, when in doubt, let's vomit.
not totally. It depends on what part of the brain is. Like that's actually lower brain stuff, vomiting. But yeah, the
You
brain.
ever like vomit and like you feel like your stomach like cringe?
Because it is.
Yeah.
Like it turns and like just like
Yeah.
It
How do you
does.
word stuff?
You're gonna love digestive stuff in APT.
I feel better when I vomit, so just get it out.
Okay, let's talk
Get it
about.
all out of me.
So I'm still talking about flushing mechanisms, but I want to go back to the lower body. Okay, so
By the way, this is a guy.
it is a guy. I just noticed. I like really focus on the part that I'm talking about. I'm like, we're all respiratory.
it's like the first thing I always notice when it's a guy or a girl.
Oh, that says something.
Okay, so lower body flushing mechanisms, basically out of urogenital and digestive tract. So defecation itself, you don't have that many pathogens coming in from the distal part of the digestive system because there's feces coming out all the time. So that's mostly a portal of exit, not entry, because that's technically a flushing mechanism. If you're having diarrhea, that's a more effective flushing mechanism, also unpleasant. Urination, this one, frequent urination is definitely protective. And I know we did talk about in here that nurses and teachers K-12 teachers and people who have to be at their work like constantly for the whole shift tend to urinate less frequently, and they tend to get more UTIs because they're losing the flushing mechanism.
So the longer you don't urinate, the more like a microbe has.
The easier it is for a microbe to swim up. Yeah.
How do you get a microbe in your pants?
It's mostly, so a lot of the ones we talked about from microbe, they're GI tract inhabitants. So it could be your own microbes moving over. And then male anatomy, it's a lot further to the urethra from the anus than women. which is just how it is, and that's why women get more UTIs. Along the same vein, sex increases UTIs for both sexes, but especially women because of the shorter urethra thing. And it also, this concept relates to if microbes are going to be good UTI causers, they have to swim.
Wait, so that's why they say like you should, never mind.
You should urinate after sexual activity.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a physiological helpful thing. Yeah, to prevent UTIs. So especially if you're prone to UTIs, that's helpful. Like when you're a nurse, you get used to saying things like in the clinical way, and then it gets easier. But I don't know, to a patient, you might want to say you should pee after sex.
You should
I mean-
urinate after intercourse.
Depends on, like, are they going to understand what you just said, or do you need to say you need to pee after sex? I'm so glad this video is not, my channel is not public anymore.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, we have classes.
But this, other pre-nursing classes are talking about this too. They should be. We got all the flushing, oh yeah, one more flushing mechanism. So for women, the vaginal secretions, like the normal ones, and they are normal, healthy vagina will have secretions.
Is this flushing?
It is flushing. Vaginal secretions are also a flushing mechanism. So let's make a note. They are flushing, and I forgot to say this, they are also acidic. They should be acidic. So there's acid for chemical barrier, there's flushing for mechanical barrier. And the mucous membrane in there also being intact, that would be a physical barrier.
What?
Mucous membrane. So this is not something that people think about a lot, but every entrance to your body, it has a mucous membrane that's normal. And it should be.
Weird.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Huh?
I don't like just this weird thing about things.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But you should have, because it's a barrier and it's protective. And the mucus itself will trap microbes. And then your flushing mechanisms or chemicals can help eliminate them. So I think that's, what's the slide after? Okay, this is getting into the second line of defense things. So all of the things I've talked about, let's go back to the flow chart here. And maybe just add some stuff onto here as well. Or you could do this on your own later, but we're going to put flushing mechanisms here. And our other physical barriers were hairs and eyelashes, skin, mucous membranes. Mucous membranes. The chemicals I won't relist, but you could maybe write that in later to help you study. All of this stuff is the first line of defense, because if a pathogen is going to get through the portal of entry, it has to get past this stuff. It has to get past this stuff. That's the first thing that it would have to overcome.
Is your eyeball a portal of entry?
Yeah, it is. I didn't.
Is that like pink eye?
Yeah, so the question was, is your eyeball a portal of entry? Yes, it is, for stuff like pink eye. And this is so sad, babies when they're born, and when they're smushing through the vaginal canal and stuff gets smushed into their eyes, they can catch diseases and go blind depending on what they encounter. So if you become an OB nurse, they put these drops in the baby's eyes after they're born. That's to prevent it, give it some help to not be a portal of entry. So when you see the newborn, my cousin just had a baby, cousin's wife, and you see that picture, her eyes look all weird. It's from the drops. So like there'll be a picture, if they're taking pictures constantly, their eyes are good, their eyes are puffy, and then like an hour later their eyes
Yeah,
are
like-
closed because they're asleep.
I'll fall asleep with my contacts, and then like I take them out, and I put them in this, and like I put them in a solution, and then like I'll have like the mucus that's like on my eyelashes or whatever. Is that mucus?
It's protective.
Yes. But then I'll put the contacts back in, and my eyes will get red.
Because they probably got microbes growing on.
Oh,
That's gross.
got dirty eyeballs.
All these things that you never see growing. Yeah, so you know how you're supposed to rub them?
Mm-hmm.
Are you still, I don't wear contacts, but you used to have to rub them.
Yeah, you put them in and you.
That's to remove
It's
microbes.
like scrubbing.
Yeah, kind of. And then the chemical is to prevent more microbes from growing. But if the surface of your eye is dry, it's more likely to get tiny tears, and your whole process of moving tears, like you cry these tears you never feel, and they go over your eye. I think it's this way. And then they go over into this tiny hole,
I hate that.
and then they go into your nose. Do you know that? Like we don't teach that here, but it's really cool.
Oh, when you get
That's why when you
eyelash-
cry, your nose gets stuffy.
When you get an eyelash, you're supposed to like go this way. Like that.
Are you?